Too often we divide ourselves. Our intellect goes one way, our emotions another, and our instincts somewhere else entirely. We fragment. We become strangers to ourselves. But the moment we choose to face our inner conflicts, our desires, our shame, our longings, we start to become whole again. In confronting our sexual nature, we are not diminishing ourselves. We are meeting our shadow. The shadow does not wish to be destroyed. It wishes to be recognized. Sexual energy becomes destructive only when ignored or misused. But when honored, it reveals itself as a bridge, a path leading us inward toward transformation. This journey requires discipline, yes, but not the cold kind born of guilt or moral panic. No, this is sacred discipline, the will to unify the fragmented self. Each time we observe our impulses with clarity and channel them creatively, we lay a stone on the path of our own awakening. At the core of this transformation lies the inner marriage, the integration of the masculine and feminine within you. When your drive for conquest meets your capacity for compassion, when your hunger meets your vision, you become whole. This is not about celibacy. This is not about indulgence. This is about conscious mastery, about the choice to no longer be ruled by the tides within, but to become the ocean itself. So ask yourself, can I contain this fire long enough to let it light my path? Can I turn my longing into language, my ache into art? Can I love myself deeply enough to rise, not fall into my desire? When you do, your sexual energy becomes more than instinct. It becomes alchemy. And through that alchemy, you meet your true self, not as a fantasy but as a living flame. You said when we speak of sexual energy, we often confine it to the biological, the reproductive or the purely physical. It is usually reduced to an urge, an instinct, or at most a mechanism for emotional intimacy. But this view is tragically limited. Sexual energy at its core is not just biological, it is psychic. It is one of the most potent manifestations of libido, not merely in the Freudian sense, but as the fundamental life force that animates all of human experience. This energy is primal. It is ancient. It is not only the power that creates life externally, it is the same force that can recreate your life internally. If left unconscious or misdirected, it can lead to obsession, compulsion, or even despair. But if recognized for what it truly is, it can become a source of immense creative transformation. From childhood to adulthood, our sexual development mirrors the evolution of our psyche. This energy arises before we even understand it. It emerges in symbols, dreams, fantasies, and behaviors that seem mysterious. And rightly so. Because sexual energy is not simply about pleasure, it is a language of the unconscious. It is one of the first ways the deeper layers of the psyche attempt to speak. To grasp the full power of this energy, we must move beyond a materialist view of human nature. We must recognize that what stirs in our loins also stirs in our imagination. The same fire that fuels lust also fuels ambition. The same force that seeks union with another also seeks wholeness within the self. This is because sexual energy, in its essence, is the urge to unite with another, with meaning, with God, or with the unrealized parts of our own being. This is why the mystics spoke of ecstasy, not just physical ecstasy, but a deep psychic surrender into union with something greater than the ego. Sexual energy is not just for the body, it is the raw fuel of transformation. And when it is misused, not only is the body degraded, but the soul becomes lost. The energy turns chaotic, flooding the mind with obsessions, fantasies, and compulsions that erode the structure of the self. But when this energy is made conscious, when it is named, observed and worked with, it begins to change character. It lifts from the lower chakras, so to speak, and ascends into vision, voice, and vocation. This is not metaphorical. One need only look at artists, musicians, inventors, and thinkers to see the signs of transmuted desire. The longing once aimed outward is turned inward, and from it something new is born. A novel, a painting, a speech, a philosophy, a movement. The link between sexual energy and creativity is not coincidental, it is causal. This is the same energy, redirected. The ancient alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but the true alchemy happens in the psyche. Sexual energy is the lead of the instincts, dense and heavy. But through awareness and discipline, it can become the gold of genius, insight, and illumination. This is not a call to celibacy, nor is it a celebration of hedonism. It is something more paradoxical. It is the recognition that the sexual instinct carries a dual purpose. one outward toward others and one inward toward the self. When we remain unconscious, this energy rules us. We chase fantasies. We feel possessed by impulses. We are dragged by the tides of longing without understanding where they lead. But when we begin to differentiate, when we say, "This desire arises, but it does not define me," we step into a new relationship with our own psyche. We become alchemists of our own instincts. The energy does not disappear, it simply shifts form. It becomes psychic currency, to be invested in creation, growth, and inner development. This is especially evident in dreams. Sexual symbols in dreams are almost never literal. They often signify transformation, merging opposites, or the longing for unity with a disowned part of oneself. The unconscious mind uses erotic imagery, not to seduce us into indulgence, but to invite us into integration. The figures we desire may represent inner potentials we have not yet accepted: power, vulnerability, intuition, discipline. The dream is asking, what within you longs to be known through this desire? To work with this energy is to take responsibility for one's inner world. It is to say, my longing matters. It is trying to lead me somewhere. And that place is not always the arms of another. Sometimes it is the confrontation with one's own unlived life. The books you haven't written, the conversations you avoid, the solitude you fear, the vision you won't admit you carry. It is through recognizing the psychological nature of sexual energy that we begin to free ourselves from its compulsive hold. Not by suppression, which leads to neurosis, nor by unbridled expression, which leads to dissociation, but through integration. Through seeing sexual energy not as a curse or an obstacle, but as a sacred call from the unconscious, asking to be transformed. It is asking not just to be felt, but to be understood. To live consciously is to recognize that energy. In all its forms is never fixed. It is always seeking movement, expression, and elevation. Sexual energy is no exception. When we observe the human condition carefully, we see that this energy, though instinctual in origin, contains within it the potential for immense transformation. But this transformation does not occur automatically. It demands awareness, intention, and a radical shift in perspective. This shift is what we call transmutation. Transmutation is not suppression. It is not the denial of desire, nor is it a moralistic crusade against one's own body. Instead, it is the art of redirection. It is the deliberate act of raising energy from its base expression to a higher psychological or spiritual function. Just as water can be turned to steam and made to drive a turbine, so too can sexual energy be refined and elevated, becoming a source of creativity, discipline, insight, and inner strength. The error of our time is to believe that every impulse must be acted upon, every desire fulfilled in the external world. But the psyche speaks in symbols, not commands. Desire, especially sexual desire, is not always a call to physical union. More often, it is a signal from the unconscious, indicating unexpressed aspects of the self yearning to be lived. In this sense, sexual energy can be understood as a carrier of meaning. When it is discharged unconsciously, its potential is lost. But when it is held, not repressed but contained and contemplated, something extraordinary happens. It begins to metamorphose. It becomes fuel for inner growth. This containment is not asceticism. It is not about becoming sterile or emotionally distant. It is about allowing energy to gestate within the psyche long enough to be reimagined in symbolic form. A person who practices transmutation begins to channel sexual energy into pursuits that elevate the soul: art, study, invention, devotion, mentorship, healing, and the long labor of becoming whole. But this process requires friction. The moment we attempt to redirect instinct, we encounter resistance. The lower nature rebels. The ego fears collapse and the body craves release. This inner tension, however, is not a flaw. It is the crucible of transformation. To hold desire in conscious awareness without collapsing into indulgence or repression is to generate a pressure that awakens deeper faculties of perception. In this state, we are no longer ruled by the instinct. We are engaging with it as a partner in our evolution. The ancient sages knew this well. In every spiritual tradition, there are hidden teachings on the alchemy of desire. The serpent is not slain, it is raised. The fire is not extinguished, it is purified. The goal is not to kill the instinct, but to spiritualize it, to make it serve a higher order of being. In psychological terms, this means transforming libido from mere pleasure-seeking into goal-seeking. The same energy that compels us to pursue gratification can be converted into ambition, discipline, and spiritual hunger. But this requires intention. It requires the development of an inner structure, a container within the psyche, capable of holding power without being destroyed by it. This container is built through practices: solitude, reflection, creative work, physical discipline, silence, symbolic ritual. It is also built through suffering, not pointless suffering, but the kind that comes from choosing the harder path, the one that does not offer immediate satisfaction, but promises deeper integration. The more we cultivate this inner vessel, the more we are able to endure and redirect the force of desire. Not just sexual desire, but all unrefined longing, power, recognition, control, attachment. These energies, when transmuted, become tools of individuation. They no longer dominate us from the shadows. They become integrated, purified, and capable of serving the self rather than the fragmented ego. This is the true meaning of inner strength, not the absence of passion, but the conscious command of it. Within every individual lies a hidden dimension, a realm of repressed impulses, unacknowledged desires, denied fears, and forgotten potential. This realm is what depth psychology refers to as the shadow. It is not inherently evil or dangerous. It is simply unknown. It holds the aspects of ourselves that the ego, shaped by culture, family, religion, and personal experience, has deemed unacceptable, shameful, or too disruptive to fit within our socially constructed identity. Sexual energy is often one of the most significant forces relegated to this shadow. Because it is powerful, raw, and socially charged, many people grow up learning to fear it, hide it, or manipulate it. We are told what is appropriate, what is pure, what is dirty, and what is perverse. In this process, natural instinct becomes split from the conscious self. The result is an inner fracture. What is not allowed into the light of awareness festers in the dark, and there it gains unconscious power. The shadow does not disappear because we ignore it. In fact, it becomes more dangerous precisely because it is denied. When we do not acknowledge our hidden drives and desires, they begin to manifest in distorted forms: compulsions, addictions, projections, obsessions, and self-sabotaging behaviors. We find ourselves blaming others for feelings we do not wish to admit. We are drawn to people or situations that mirror the disowned parts of ourselves. The shadow, when not integrated, finds its way into our lives through indirect and often destructive paths. But if we are willing to turn inward and face this hidden realm, we discover something extraordinary. The shadow is not merely a repository of darkness. It is also the seat of untapped vitality, creativity, and freedom. The very traits we have pushed away, our aggression, lust, envy, power, or assertiveness, may be precisely what we need to reclaim in order to live fully and authentically. To integrate the shadow is not to become immoral or indulgent. It is to become whole. It is to allow the totality of one's being to come into consciousness, so that nothing within us operates without our permission or awareness. This is particularly essential with sexual energy, which carries both the potential for union and destruction, for awakening and escapism. Shadow integration requires honesty. It demands that we ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. What do I desire but am afraid to admit? What part of my sexual nature do I judge in others, but secretly carry within myself? Where have I allowed shame to govern my body or identity? These questions are not meant to shame us further. They are doorways to truth. They are the beginning of reintegration. Often what we find in the sexual shadow is not depravity, but unlived life. The longing for intimacy we never allowed. The hunger for pleasure we denied ourselves. The need for power that we buried under passivity. The wish to be seen, touched, held, or chosen, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. These desires, when brought to the surface, no longer control us. They become part of our story, rather than the source of our sabotage. True integration also means making peace with paradox. You can be spiritual and sexual, disciplined and desiring, strong and vulnerable. The shadow is the keeper of these contradictions. When we integrate it, we become more nuanced, more alive, and more authentic. We are no longer playing roles. We are living from the totality of who we are. This psychological work is not merely for self-understanding, it is an ethical imperative. For every unintegrated shadow becomes a threat, not only to the self but to others. What we cannot own in ourselves, we tend to project onto the world. We demonize others for expressing what we have not yet accepted. We become moralistic, rigid, judgmental, or secretly envious. Integration dissolves this cycle. It gives us compassion without naivety, strength without cruelty, and passion without possession. In the end, the shadow is not our enemy. It is our invitation. It does not seek to destroy us, but to show us what we have not yet embraced. To become oneself is perhaps the most challenging and noble pursuit a person can undertake. It is not merely a matter of self-expression or personal freedom. It is the slow, often painful unfolding of the deeper self, what psychology calls the process of individuation. And this unfolding is not possible without discipline. Discipline, in this context, is not a rigid system of rules or a moralistic attempt to subdue one's nature. It is a sacred practice of alignment. It is the conscious effort to live in accordance with one's inner truth, rather than being pulled blindly by unconscious instincts or external expectations. Sexual energy, being one of the strongest instinctual forces within the psyche, becomes a crucial testing ground for this practice. When sexual energy arises, it brings with it an intensity that can easily overwhelm reason. It urges immediacy. It tempts us with escape from boredom, loneliness, or existential discomfort. Without discipline, it can hijack our attention, drain our energy, and fragment our will. But when met with awareness and held in conscious tension, this energy becomes a catalyst for transformation. Discipline allows us to create space between impulse and action. In that space, we are not repressing the energy, we are observing it. We are sitting with its heat, its urgency, its allure, and asking, what does this energy want from me? What lies beneath this desire? Is this a longing for physical contact, or a cry for connection, validation, creativity, or expression? Through disciplined inquiry, we begin to hear the deeper voice within the impulse. We stop reacting and start listening. This listening is the beginning of individuation, because it brings the unconscious into dialogue with the conscious mind. We are no longer possessed by the instinct. We are in relationship with it. The modern world encourages indulgence and speed. Rarely are we taught the value of containment. But the psyche grows through tension, not through immediate gratification. Just as a seed must remain buried in the dark before it breaks into the light, so must our sexual energy be allowed to gestate. Discipline becomes the container in which this gestation can happen. It provides the structure within which something new can be born. This is not about denying desire. It is about transforming the relationship we have with it. Instead of allowing the energy to dissipate in momentary pleasures, we harness it and redirect it into the creation of the self. Whether it is through creative work, physical training, spiritual practice, or deep intellectual engagement, disciplined transmutation channels the raw material of desire into acts of meaning. What begins as an erotic impulse becomes a drive to grow, to understand, to build, to serve, to create. The energy does not vanish. It is simply given new direction. But this redirection requires the ego to submit to a higher center within, the self. It requires the willingness to endure frustration, ambiguity, and periods of inner conflict without collapsing back into old habits. Discipline also teaches us emotional maturity. It reveals the difference between longing and need, between authentic desire and compulsive craving. It shows us that we are capable of holding powerful energies without being enslaved by them. This recognition builds inner strength. It develops willpower not as a form of control, but as a tool for liberation. We are no longer pulled apart by competing urges. We are held together by a clear sense of purpose. Each time we choose the path of discipline over impulse, we reinforce a deeper identity. Not the false self shaped by masks and projections, but the true self that emerges only through sustained inner work. We begin to feel a center forming within us, something stable, something timeless. This center is not reactive, it is generative. It creates rather than consumes. It gives shape to our energy, depth to our choices, and meaning to our suffering. Individuation through discipline is not the denial of life. It is the beginning of conscious life. It is the realization that every instinct, especially sexual energy, can become a doorway to deeper awareness if we have the courage to face it and the strength to hold it without collapsing into it. At the heart of all true transformation lies a profound psychological union, an inner marriage between the seemingly opposing forces within us. This union is not a romantic fantasy, nor a mere metaphor. It is a vital process through which we bring together the masculine and feminine energies of the psyche, those archetypal polarities that shape our thoughts, behaviors, desires, and identity. Each individual, regardless of gender, carries both masculine and feminine principles within. The masculine, in its essence, is the force of direction, clarity, structure, logic, action, and will. It is what sets boundaries, creates order, and pursues goals. The feminine, by contrast, is receptive, intuitive, fluid, nurturing, and creative. It listens before it speaks, senses before it acts, and holds rather than pushes. These forces are not in opposition. They are complementary, like two wings of a single bird. When these energies are out of balance, the psyche suffers. A person overly identified with the masculine may become rigid, detached, or obsessed with control, suppressing emotion and vulnerability. A person dominated by the unconscious feminine may fall into passivity, confusion, emotional chaos, or a loss of inner direction. Most people swing unconsciously between these poles, reacting to circumstances rather than integrating the inner opposites. Sexual energy, in its deeper psychological dimension, is the magnet that draws these opposites together. What we often seek in others, the ideal partner, the missing piece, the one who will complete us, is in truth a reflection of the parts of ourselves that remain unlived or undeveloped. The man who longs for a nurturing, intuitive woman may be estranged from his own inner feminine. The woman who yearns for a strong, purposeful man may have disowned her inner masculine. The external longing reveals an internal split. The inner marriage begins when we turn this longing inward, not by withdrawing from relationships, but by recognizing that the other is always a mirror. Instead of chasing completion in the outer world, we begin the slow work of reconciling the inner dualities. We listen to the voices within that we have silenced. We make space for both reason and feeling, strength and sensitivity, logic and imagination, structure and flow. This work is neither easy nor comfortable. The psyche resists integration. It prefers simplicity, clear roles and familiar patterns. But real growth demands complexity. It asks us to hold the tension between opposites without forcing a premature resolution. When we are able to do this, a third element often emerges, something unexpected, creative, and whole. This is the mystery of inner alchemy. Sexual energy plays a central role in this process because it is inherently dualistic. It carries within it the longing to unite, to merge, to dissolve boundaries. But when this energy is not projected outward, when it is contained and reflected upon, it catalyzes the inner union. We begin to feel the presence of an inner partner, a counterpart who complements and completes us from within. We develop emotional self-sufficiency without emotional isolation. We become capable of love without possession, passion without dependency. The integration of masculine and feminine energies also brings profound psychological balance. We stop dividing the world into binaries, strong, weak, active, passive, rational, emotional, and begin to see the interdependence of these qualities. We become more fluid in our identity, more adaptable in our behavior, more whole in our presence. This wholeness radiates outward. It influences how we relate to others, how we express creativity, how we make decisions, how we carry desire. In many ancient traditions, the inner marriage was symbolized by sacred union, sun and moon, king and queen, sword and chalice. These were not literal unions, but symbols of the completed self, the one who has reconciled their own inner divisions and come into a deeper harmony. Sexual energy was seen not just as a reproductive force, but as the power to bridge the inner masculine and feminine, to bring heaven and earth together in the psyche. To walk the path of the inner marriage is to honor both sides of your being, to give voice to the silent half, to allow softness to meet strength, and intuition to meet intellect. This union does not erase differences. It makes them dance. It creates an internal stability from which life can be approached not in fear or craving, but with wholeness, depth, and presence.